Hello everyone, my name is Ivo and welcome to Cooking with the Koyas. Today it's all about bread storage. Whether you buy your own bread or bake your own bread, we all want to keep our bread as fresh as possible for as long as possible. And today I'd like to share with you my method for storing bread, which will easily keep for up to 2 weeks. We'll talk about the different bread storage methods. We'll talk about tips for storage, and we'll also talk and share tips on longevity and end of cycle use. So let's get started right now. So let's talk about the 3 most common methods for storing bread and then the solution. So one method is, of course, to use a bread bag, a linen or cotton bread bag. This is probably the worst for long-term storage. It's great for short-term, same day, next day, but besides that, for long-term, not a good solution. The next thing, of course, is the very common bread box. The bread box is better than the linen or cotton bag, but still not best for long-term storage, 3, 4, maybe 5 days. The third common method is beeswax, and beeswax is actually better than the prior 2, but again, not ideal for that longer term storage. We're looking for a good storage for up to 2 weeks to stay fresh. So let's talk about the solution right now. So in my opinion, superior to anything on the market is a very simple DIY, do-it-yourself storage system, and we're going to create a professional environment for bread storage, and that is right here, folks. Plastic bag and wax paper combo. Could even be beeswax paper, but to keep it simple, a ziploc or plastic sealable bag and wax paper combo. And now I'd like to share with you 3 tips on how to use this system. So this bread is actually approaching 2 weeks old. I've been away for a while. I've had dinner at friend's house, so I haven't been eating at home a lot lately. So this bread is now approaching 2 weeks. And as you can see, I've eaten about half a loaf, and I still have a half a loaf here, and it's in great shape. The first tip out of the 3 tips, the first tip is, of course, never store your bread warm. So if you bake your bread, you've got to let it cool completely before you prepare it for storage. Number 2, take your wax paper and you want to tightly wrap your bread with the wax paper. Okay, in fact, I've even been known to use elastics to keep it nice and snug and tight, because the wax paper helps to regulate humidity. It keeps your bread dry enough to prevent the mold, but damp enough to keep it soft. So once we have our relatively tightly wrapped bread, the next thing is to place it in your plastic bag with some sort of zipper closure. Zip it shut. However, remove all the air. That is the next tip. Remove all the air, or as much air as possible, out of the Ziploc bag before you make the seal. Now, because mold needs oxygen to grow, so we're going to remove all the air out of this bag to help prevent that. Now, you could do that a couple of different ways. You could actually immerse this in a sink full of water and let the water force all the air out, but that really uses a lot of water and can get messy. The other method is to quite simply do what I did, just with pressure, remove all the air and then zip it shut. That works fine. That's removed enough air. The third thing is you can actually buy bags with like circular discs on the side where you can manually pump the air out. Those are good. They're reusable bags, definitely good, as opposed to using a a food saver system where it might suck all the air and make pressure and flatten your bread out. You don't want that. But honestly, what I just did here is good enough. And I'm not sure about the longevity of those bags with the manual pump system, but this works. And in fact, you want to DIY, you can zip the bag shut and then leave a little bit open here and then just vacuum seal the bag in a DIY method. That method works good too. The key is to remove the air from the bag as much as possible. So with all our air removed, the plastic keeps the air out, the wax paper insulates the bread and prevents it from sweating, and we need one more thing to help create that perfect microclimate, and I'm going to share that next with 5 tips on longevity and end of use. So tip number 1. Tip number 1 is easy. That is, bread stores better whole than it does sliced. So a slice as you go method is best. So only slice what you need for the meal. You could always slice some, leave the bread, and as you need more, continue to slice it, but it's best stored whole. Now, having said that, if you do have slices, tip number 2 is you keep the slices up against the bread so that it helps prevent against moisture loss. And then when you wrap it all together as if it were one. Some people like to actually cut the end off and leave the end and use it as a plug up against the face of the cut side of the bread, again, to help slow down and prevent the moisture loss from your loaf of bread. I don't like to do that. I like to eat the end piece. It's one of my favorites. But anyways, those 2 tips right there for longevity will definitely help with the longer term storage. Tip number 3, and this is the most important tip, and that is the refrigerator. Yes, folks, the refrigerator is the key. Using this system and leaving your bread on the counter will not keep your bread for up to 2 weeks. The fridge is essential for us to create that, let's call professional microclimate to help keep our bread, easily keep our bread up to 2 weeks. Now, a lot of the critics will say, avoid the fridge. The fridge is bad for bread storage. The fridge will, you'll get staling in the fridge, retrogradation and moisture loss. And all of that is true if, and this is a big if, they might think that you're just storing your bread in the fridge as is, or maybe you're just throwing it loose into a grocery bag and putting it in the fridge. And if that's the case, then yes, the fridge is not ideal. However, when you use this system, the combination of the wax paper with the sealed plastic bag with the air removed in the refrigerator, now you have that professional microclimate that easily keeps your bread fresh for up to 2 weeks. So that brings us to tip number 4. So our bread's been storing for up to 2 weeks. It doesn't store forever. So at some point we have to do something with it. Let's take a slice of this bread. Look at this bread. Isn't that nice? For almost 2 weeks. 2 more days, it'll be 2 weeks. This bread is amazing. And so what happens is, even with our storage method, it slows down the loss of moisture, okay? The storage method we have will slow the loss of moisture. But after 2 weeks, the moisture eventually slowly starts to evaporate and move into the crust. It moves from inwards, it goes outwards. So the crumb now becomes drier. So tip number 4, after let's say 2 weeks, you can now take this bread and cut it into, let's say 1-inch cubes, 2 to 3 centimeters. And now we can make croutons or breadcrumbs. So quite simply, once you've done that, take your bread, put it into or onto a sheet pan and spread them out. I would fill this pan, but spread them out so that they're all loosely on there and let them dry out. You could do two things. You could let it dry out just like this in the air. Actually, three things. You could put it in the oven with the light on, which will create a warmer environment and help them dry quicker. Or you can actually bake them at about 300 degrees Fahrenheit, 150 Celsius, for 10-15 minutes. Let them come out, let them cool. That's the third way you can do them. But the main thing is you want these to dry out and be hard. And at that point, you can keep them as croutons, or I put them into a blender and I grind them to a nice fine grind, and I get my nice fine Italian breadcrumbs. And if you've got sourdough bread, now you've got sourdough breadcrumbs. And all you have to do, you can of course freeze them, but you can also just keep them in a cool, dry place, like a jar with the lid on it, and they will keep in your pantry no problem, as long as they're kept dry. So there you go. That's tip number 4. We're going to move on to number 5, but before I do, I just want to say, one loaf of bread, nothing goes to waste. You're able to keep it for up to 2 weeks, and even after 2 weeks, when the bread is older, you make breadcrumbs or croutons. What a perfect system. Tip number 5, of course, you've probably guessed it, is the freezer. And we can, of course, freeze this bread. And if you're going to freeze it, use the same technique. The wax paper, ziploc or sealed bag, removed all the air, and put it in the freezer. In fact, if you have slices of bread, I would even wrap those slices with wax paper first, then put them in the freezer bag and into the freezer. And that way you can keep your bread even longer. And now, of course, we can't forget the taste test. Let's try a piece of this almost 2-week-old bread. Very, very good bread. The crumb was a little bit dry, but not overly dry, and still soft, and the crust still maintained its texture and flavor. You would never know that this bread was almost 2 weeks old. Having said that, folks, I really, really hope you give this system a try. I think you'll be impressed. Your bread will stay fresher for longer and easily keep, not only keep, but keep really well for up to 2 weeks. Wherever you're tuning in from, I want to say thank you for joining me on today's episode of Cooking with the Koyas. And as always, folks, until next time, buon appetito and salute. Cheers.